Hello and welcome everybody to Mindset and Money Matters when dealing with late season shocks. I'm Louisa Ferrier. I'm a project manager here at BCG, and it's great to have Kate Burke from Think Agri, Dr. Kate Burke from Think Agri with us today. I'd like to acknowledge the funders. This webinar has received funding from the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. And just to kick things off, I'd like to encourage you to share in your chat box who you are, where you're from, and what you've been up to this morning or, in fact, recently. So just so we get to know each other. And some housekeeping. This session will be recorded, and we really want it to be interactive. So please leave your camera on. If you have any questions at any time, please put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we'll get to them as soon as we can. And have a pen and paper ready as well. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kate Burke. She brings over 30 years experience with her today as a researcher, agronomist, advisor and author for all the Australian dryland cropping sector. These experiences have often seen Kate sitting with the decision makers, be that in the ute cabin, inspecting crops, or around the kitchen table or in the office, and it's strategizing about the next steps a farming business can take. And in seasons like this, with the dry finish, frost, hail, and other factors, at this time of year, or regardless of the outcome, monitoring crops and conditions in the lead up to harvest can be a powerful tool. And this was a topic at the main field day this year in September, but also last year, which Kate was in attendance at. So with all of that knowledge and with your experience at home, we're going to go on a cabin ride together for the next hour. And I hope you can gain some strategies to assist with the final stages of the 2024 growing season. And just like on that crop drive, this is going to be interactive. So we do want you to keep your cameras on if you can. We want you to feel comfortable in contributing and participating to get the most out of today's webinar. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Lou. Thanks for that very generous introduction. And yeah, if it's possible, I'd love others to join Tim. That looks like Tim Hewitt, is it? Nice to see you, Tim. Long time no see. And even Jess and Grace, if you're able to put your cameras on, that'd be good too. And oh, hello, here's Fiona Best, the big boss. It's good to have a few of the gang here. And Claire, Donna, welcome. And I just thought, and Peter, good to see you again. I've just thought, Lou, while we're waiting for a few guests to pop in, g'day Jai. It'd be just worth, I suppose, I'd love to hear from you what you're hearing around the traps and the motivation behind putting this little webinar together.
Me, Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've
gone off script already.
Right, that's okay. We've had an interesting September, October, I suppose. So there was widespread frost, and even just a drive around the countryside, we can see some frost damage from the roadside, and then perhaps not some in other cases, or perhaps it's further into the paddock. We had some rain last weekend or Friday, and further north of Birchip, so some significant rain, 40, 50 millimetres.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then some hail events as well, perhaps further into the Wimmera. I don't know what other people are seeing. So it's always an interesting time of year, but there's still things that people can do. And
yeah, I agree, Lou, absolutely. And it'd be great if people could just throw in the chat if they know how to access the chat or aren't driving and are able to, perhaps how much rain they had, if they had any, and if they had any hail come through.
Mm.
We weren't thinking about hail when we started our planning, were we? Did we?
No. So, Kate, you like to start these things with some thought drafting. Can you take us through an exercise?
Yeah, I will. And I'll just give a little bit of background as to why I like to do thought drafting. Some of the people who've been in my workshops will be familiar with what I call the liver cleanse. And basically, the liver cleanse is getting sludge off your liver, or off the liver in your brain. And sometimes I like to call it a sort of a spring prune, just like when you prune back your roses for new growth. And the reason I like to do that is, ultimately we're emotional human beings. We do a lot of thinking and we have all this stuff in our heads. But sometimes we just need to unpack a bit of stuff so we can concentrate on the here and now. Give you an example of really hit home to me just how emotions drive our decision making. Yesterday, we're in the middle of a renovation. We've literally got crap everywhere, and we decided we got to that critical threshold yesterday, and so we had a clean out. And I was going through this box that I have on my chest of drawers, and it's a box that was actually made for my grandmother by a former boyfriend. This guy was trying to woo her heart in the 1920s. And I'm going through, and it's where I put my receipts, and it's where, you get the little button packets when you buy new clothes or something, and I put the button packets in there. And I found a C-grade netball medal from 1983 when we came runners up. I found some religious medals and things that I don't think they're even mine. And I found some pennies, and I'm thinking, if ever there's an example of why we keep stuff, we don't keep this stuff on logic. This is all purely emotional. And, whether it's driven by guilt or driven by sentimentality, I'm not quite game to chuck out the religious medals, like in case I go to hell or something. I found an article about my mum winning a hole-in-one. And of course, I kept all that stuff and then chucked out all the receipts that were 10 years old, and I'll do it all again in another 10 years. So back to what we need to do now is, looking at those rainfalls, sort of that 35 mil and up to 75 mil. I mean, that's pretty full on. And so that does mess with the head a bit. So what I'd like people to do is I'd just like them to, in a quick minute, just jot down what they're thinking about right now. So quick points. So we just might pause for a moment. I'll stop talking, which is unusual. And we'll get you to play along too, Lou, and we'll all do it together. So if we can just write down whatever's on our mind right now. Righto, well, I've managed to write down 5 things in that time, and so that's probably enough. You can repeat this exercise if you've still got other things you want to write down. What I would like you to do now is work out how much control you have over the things you've written down. So do you have a lot of control or full control? So is it something that you're in charge of? Do you have influence, or is it something that concerns you but ultimately you've got no control? So if you've got full control, I just want you to go through your list and put an FC on anything where you've got full control. If you've got some control, so you can influence whatever the things are in a little way, I want you to put an SC beside those things. Now, if you've got no control, I want you to put an NC beside on your list. So the second part of this exercise is then to go back and decide what's very important, so VIP, what's somewhat important, so SIP, VIP, SIP, and what are the NIPs, what's not important. So we'll go through first, anything that, you know, you thought was important, but you've got it down on paper and you think, oh, that's not that important, put a NIP beside it, NIP. Anything that's, you know, has some importance, but it's not the end of the world if you don't get to it, put an SIP. And if it's really, really important, put a VIP on it. Then I want you to circle the things that you've got full control on and that are very important. They're the things to prioritise and focus on. If you've got things there that are very important but no control, I want you to circle those as well. And they're the things where acceptance is useful. We just have to accept it is what it is. And, or another term I like to use is right now it's like this. And then the stuff in between, well, then it's a matter of prioritising, working out, you know, where that fits in the scheme of things and just picking a few priorities after, you know, outside of focusing on the really important full control stuff. Righto.
Good exercise, Kate. So
how did that feel, people?
A few smiles I can see.
Good. Yeah, I love it.
It puts things into perspective, especially in the lead up. I had Christmas down there, Kate. So even the lead up to that.
Oh God, yeah, I didn't get that far.
So Kate, what about damage in crops? Potential damage seems in our control or out of our control, and we're finding there's plenty of farmers who are reluctant to have a good look in their crops at the moment. Is it just because they're too busy or experienced, or is there something else to that?
Yeah, good question. So, yeah, the damage that's occurred, you know, there's nothing we can do about that, but understanding and quantifying how much we've got, that's something, and assessing that damage, and assessing how much money we've got out there, that is in our control. And I read something today from Adam Grant, the author of Think Again. He said, you know, when there's been a traumatic event, and this year there's been some trauma related to growing crops, that about 66% of the people will be resilient and just be able to take it in their stride and get on and do stuff. Then there'll be the other third will have more trouble coping. And one of the things that I see is it's natural to be a bit fearful of what the outcome has been. And in it, I started off talking about emotion because I think we overestimate how logical and how rational we are. And we're getting a lot better at it about monitoring crops at this time of year. But in the past, it was sort of once you take the boom spray out, it's shut the gate and until you bring the header in. And we've worked out through experience that, particularly after a frost, that approach can mean we miss opportunities. So if we can overcome that fear and just accept that something bad's happened, give our brain a bit of a grease and oil change, which is what I tried to do in the liver cleanse exercise. And then we can set about, just being practical about what we do and how we assess what's going on.
And Kate, the season's not over yet, so there's still an opportunity to get out there and assess the damage. So how do we know? Do we put numbers to it?
Yeah, good question. Absolutely. Particularly with this rain, that rain will have a huge influence on later sown crops and on lentils and any crops that have got a bit of green in them. It's amazing what can happen. So that in terms of the approach, I like to do a couple of things. Firstly, there's nothing better than jumping the fence. And when I mean jumping the fence, if we talk about frost specifically, it's about going to the most vulnerable paddocks and to the lowest point of those paddocks and getting a good look there at assessing damage, and then going to, a couple of other spots in the same paddock. And then you can complement that with technology, things like biomass maps, for example, or previous frost maps. And we know that the drier the paddock, the more prone it could be to frost damage. So that's the first thing. Once you collect a bit of that data, the next exercise is really about having a stab at a few different scenarios. Do you want me to sort of to go through that now, Lou, about what that might look like?
Yeah, we can. But I do want to remind people, if they could share who they are and where they're from and what they've been up to, that would be great too in the chat. So please take us through an example though, Kate, of some scenarios.
Yeah, okay. So and again, like it doesn't need to be rocket science. I think that there's 3 levels to this. There's the whole of farm level, then there's the per crop level, and then there's down to the paddock. And if you think about what we've been trying to do all year, we've been trying to, we conserve off-season moisture. Then we're trying to convert that moisture that we've caught, and we convert that into biomass and then into grain. And then this last little step is actually collecting that and turning that into cash. So with that in mind, the first sum to do, I think, is the real big picture sum. So work out, well, how much money have we spent getting the crops this far, and what at a whole of farm level, and what's it going to take to finish it off. And and so I've just done that here and said, well, righto, in this example, it's 2.6 million. And then most people who do their crop planning now on something like AgWorld would already have a worst case, best case, and medium case scenario. or you can do it in your head, but just at that big level. So if our scenario was worst case 1.6 million of income, middle case 2.8 of income, and best case 4.2 million of income, we know then that in the worst case, we're going to, our costs are 2.6. So that's all costs, including our overheads. So we're going to be $1 million short. In the middle case scenario, we're going to be around break even or a couple of $100,000 in front. And in the best case scenario, we're well in front. So that's the first, that's the first level. Then the next level down, you might just do it by crop type and say, do the same deal, go through your wheat and think, righto, on average, if our wheat yields 1.2 tonne, choose a price that you're comfortable with, and you can work out a gross revenue at that level, and you can do it again at, 2 different yields, and then do that for each crop type, add it all up, go through the same exercise. That's all good and well, but I find the best way to do it is per paddock. And particularly in a year like this, where all the crops are coming in at once. So as on Twitter, Beck Marshall was talking about at Quamby, their stuff's coming in at, they're going to have hay, lentils, barley and canola ready all at once. So then you've got to work out, well, your gut tells you lentils wait for no one, hay waits for no one. So how are we going to manage that? And then traditionally, it might be, well, let's tackle the barley, then the canola. But depending on how much yield you've got there on each of those crops, there might be a few surprises if we actually work out the dollar amount in those paddocks on a per hectare basis and actually on a paddock basis, because the size of the paddock comes into it.
And so, Kate, are we talking about getting into the paddocks at that stage?
Well, I suppose what I'm talking about here is a bit of both. So, you need to do that visual inspection and actually just confirm or validate your gut feel on yield potential in the paddocks. But the main thing is to go through an exercise. And again, it can be, back of the beer box type exercise, or in my case, I've got a little whiteboard I like to use, or it can be a spreadsheet, or it can simply be a piece of paper where you write down the paddock names and go through it. What I did a few years ago, and you guys have this PDF that you can pop in the chat box to give people, is I wanted to have a shortcut for my brain because this stuff can be time consuming. So I calculated a little ready reckoner of where you can take a yield and a price and quickly get $1 per hectare number, multiply that by the hectares in the paddock, and you've got a value for the paddock. Then it can be quite surprising, and I've been doing this on spreadsheet for about 10 years for growers, and it can really help sometimes what makes geographical sense of which paddock to tackle out of a choice of 2 or 3 may not make economic sense. There could be $200,000 difference of actually shifting everything and going and tackle something depending on what the losses could be in that particular paddock.
And sometimes some situations are not as bad as what you can initially think. Is that right in your experience, Kate?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's really important to have a look and crunch the numbers. And I guess there's a lot of hail assessment going on, so people will have some good data from their assessors, but it's worth going through the same process for your other paddocks. And I guess, people might be asking, well, how do you actually estimate the yield? And the old-fashioned way, of course, of which is as good as any, and you can make a bit of a social event of it by measuring how many plants you've got per metre squared and counting grains, for example. And then, of course, there's, things like yield profit and water use efficiency equations that can help as well. And then, of course, there's, visual gut feel. And if you're like Tim and got 40 odd seasons under your belt, or, I'm up to those sort of numbers too, we're probably not too bad at that visual look. If you've got 1 or 2 seasons under your belt, crunching the numbers and doing the counts is good. But if you're going to do counts, you've got to be mindful of your sampling procedures, and it's more than just jumping the fence and doing it, in the first couple of metres.
So tell us about that, Kate. Should they be walking through their crops? Should they be driving through their crops? How many times do they stop to take an assessment?
Well, yeah, how long's a piece of string? But, if you've got a motorbike, it's fantastic for zipping through on a 2-wheel motorbike. And I noticed that Marty Colbert, the Hale, the insurance assessor, uses a motorbike. I'm all for driving through as long as you're not going to start a fire. There's already usually wheel tracks there already that you can hook into. And at this stage, the amount of damage you might do by driving through is pretty minimal if it helps you make better financial decisions and better practical logistical decisions. Or, yeah, it's just a matter of pulling up in a few different spots if you can't drive in the paddock and just walking in, a reasonable area and just get a fair representation. 3 or 4 spots is usually enough. Like you know yourself where the variability is,
but go look for go to the variability. Don't just take it as yeah. And we've there's been some great webinars leading up to today by the GRDC about frost damage and how to assess that. So we'll share them in the comments too as useful resources for what to look for from a frost damage perspective. And Kate, do you think what gets in the way of people jumping in the paddock?
As I mentioned, fear. And yeah, it's a great book. It's a really old book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And part of fear is what is commonly now this term called resistance or avoidance. And there's an author called Stephen Pressfield who's written a book called Turning Pro and the War of Art. And it's all about breaking through those barriers and that wanting to avoid things. And essentially our brains are wired to stop us getting eaten by bears and other monsters many thousands of years ago. And anything that we perceive as making us feel uncomfortable, then we want to avoid. So then we tell ourselves lots of stories, like we're busy, we get active, we're trying to get ready for harvest. All of these things, we'll come up with 1,000 million reasons not to go and have a look. It's a bit like, I've came up with 1,000 million reasons not to tidy my office and not to finish my bookkeeping for BAS this last few weeks. So ultimately, we're human, and that's why we avoid this stuff.
I wonder if anyone else has some reflections about what gets in the way of jumping the fence too.
What do you reckon, Fiona? I can sort of see getting a bit of acknowledgement while watching your body language.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it's just and perhaps not wanting to acknowledge that it might be bad what you go and see. But I think it's like you've already said, There's so much power in just understanding the fear, going ahead and doing it anyway, dealing with reality, and then, information is power. So I think once you've got the information, then you can mobilize and start getting a game plan together. And if it's getting a game plan ready for harvest, then I think, this conversation would certainly motivate me to, make sure I've got a really good harvest plan, that I've been across every paddock, that I've assessed the yield potential, I've got the economic, potential sort of mapped out in my mind, and then I'm making a logistic plan, and the team knows that that's the plan, and the team understands that that's what's driving the decision making through the harvest process, and it'll underpin the logistics that you put in place for harvest. So I think, and that in a way can be really motivating for teams as well, knowing that, yep, this is the scenario and this is how we're going to respond to it in a really thoughtful way and a really proactive way. So that's kind of what's going through my mind at the moment, Kate. So thank you for the prompt.
Good, Fiona. I see Tim's got his hand up there, Lou.
Yes, Tim.
Tim's on mute. Here he is. Oh, nearly. While we're waiting for Tim to get off his mute button, Claire had a note there saying that time gets in the way, and you're spot on, Claire, because it is a busy period. And I think also, though, that time can be one of the stories we tell ourselves, because we get in that, rush, and that's probably one of my things I wanted to say today was bad things happen when you rush, and that it is worth avoiding just wanting to do stuff and just slowing down a bit and asking ourselves, well, what would happen if we did prioritise this activity? And what are the potential dollars there? All right, Tim.
I got it eventually. All I was going to say was, when you talked about jumping the fence and looking in paddocks, I suppose what I've worked out over the years is that the unknown is the worst. I mean, get out and have a look, and even if it's bad news, you can put something in place, whether it's financial or physical, that then takes the worry away. If you ignore it and leave it, it just keeps on playing on your mind. So it's uncomfortable sometimes, but the sooner you deal with it, the easier it is on me or the person.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Tim. And to that point, and also to Fiona's point about information being power, there's actually been research done where they've scanned people's brains when they're trying to make decisions about something with information and without information. And when they had information in front of them, they were using the logical part of the brain, and when they didn't have information, they were using the limbic or more sort of emotional side of the brain, or the flight versus fright response side of the brain. And in that particular example, or bit of research that I read about it from a guy called Travis Bradbury, and it was University of Philadelphia, I think. The exercise was actually a coin tossing exercise. So the information had no bearing on the outcome because it was either heads or tails, but those that had a list of previous tosses were using the rational side of their brain to try and work it out. And those that didn't were using the emotional side of the brain. So I think it makes us feel better when we get out there and have a look, but it also helps us validate gut feel and just that, as my example of going through my box of treasures, it just helps sort of moderate those emotional responses.
And Kate, when should people be doing this? they're running through best case scenarios. There's still a season to finish, and there's still some greening crops. How do we
You've
know?
just got to get out and do it, Lou. The sooner you do it, the better feel you have for, you know, which paddocks you can call now and which paddocks you've still got to wait. But it's just getting that uncertainty out of your mind and being able to get on with it. So tomorrow.
And so knowing there could be some more damage in crops than others, or some could be looking fantastic, and that could help influence the strategy going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you know, what we don't want to get to is to have surprises at the sampling stand, or and in the past we used to see that a bit. Oh no, we didn't have frost here, but then when the header got in, you know, there was probably, compared to the paddock next door, there might have been a tonne to the hectare missing, and there was high screenings. Yet apparently there still wasn't a frost there. And so that's just that natural human response and denial that was occurring. And I guess I've been on a mission probably for the last 10 years on this topic, just to help people get past that natural human response, because there's too much money at stake and too many good opportunities, particularly, I guess, you know, it's probably getting beyond the hay cutting point now, except for the further south and later sown crops. But that's, you know, that's the immediate opportunity of, can we salvage something out of this?
Yeah, okay. And Kate, you've said checking it at paddock level is the best way to go, but what if you've got 50 paddocks?
Yeah, good.
Oh,
Good. It's a very good question. And I guess it's just to get, the main thing is to get a sense for what's going on. Like, you'll know where to look. And that's where, I suppose, in terms of doing the sums and that bigger picture, that's where, you know, having a list and one exercise I use is just getting a piece of paper like this and folding it up into the number of paddocks you've got and just scribbling it down really quickly, paddock by paddock, and what it might be. Or just even in the notes on your phone, but doing some sort of calculation for those 50 paddocks is, and a lot of people do this, you know, that 66% of resilience, let's just move on, get on with it, farmers are doing this already. And I guess I just want to encourage those that are sort of just in their head at the moment or feel too busy to put some numbers down to have a go.
yeah. So is that making sense to people listening in? Folding up that page and putting some numbers down.
Fiona's got a question.
Oh, well, it was just a comment, really, and maybe it comes down to how many people are working within the business. But I feel like it could be a task, if it hasn't been done already, that it's something that you come together with the other people who are in your team and you're saying, righto, I think this is something that we're going to need to do. And if we've got 50 or 60 paddocks, which is a pretty, big undertaking, you've highly likely got other people in your team that are going to help you manage the harvest program over 50 paddocks, that I'd be deploying those resources now and saying, let's jump over let's jump the fences, let's go and do some calculations on some of these paddocks each, let's get a feel for what's going on, and then we'll come back together and talk about, what it means, any implications for harvest logistics. And it might mean that you are sort of mentally preparing for high screenings or storing on farm for dairy farms, as opposed to maybe thinking that you were going to deliver everything to the, into the local receival site. So, I mean, that's I think it's kind of maybe delegation and sharing that task rather than just seeing it as something that one individual has to take responsibility for on the farm or within the farm business.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Fee, and it can be used as a bit of a social activity too. Spend the morning tearing around, divvying up, and then come back together to make out what it means. Claire, you got a question too or a comment?
Thanks, Kate. Mine was just more a comment. You're probably giving me the justification now to sit down and actually finish some more of my calculations, because I'm probably too busy and caught up in the doing to actually update things. I've just been cleaning the backpacker's house, so that's why I didn't have my camera on while the baler was rolling. But it probably is important to actually sit down and finish those estimates that were, done a month ago. Do the yield estimates and work out what you will have, to sell and not to sell. And the other thing that comes to mind is logistics. With crops coming in that fast, baling, like if you've got lentils, but crops ready to harvest, have you got the workforce to spread across those things?
Yeah, it's huge. And like a couple of examples where assumptions have, turned out not to help I'll never forget it. In my last year at JSA was a bit of a damp harvest, and that year there was a lot of people who left their barley to go on to wheat and then came back 3 weeks later to finish the barley. And one Wimmera client had a yield map, and there was couple of ton, basically they lost 2 tonne to the hectare by leaving that and going onto the wheat. And their barley crops were higher yielding than their wheat crops on memory, so that it actually it cost them. So head loss, because they were concentrating on wheat quality, but head loss in barley. One thing I like to do is to do a calculation of, in each paddock, what's the cost if you lost 20% of that income per paddock? And for those where you've got a lot to lose, then bringing those paddocks up the level if they're prone to shattering, prone to head loss or things like that. That's just one little thing to think about. The other one, I reckon, Claire, and just on your commentary too, Fiona, where you've got lots of people involved and there's 2 or 3 key decision makers, doing this sort of a harvest plan, harvest estimate plan, it helps sort out some of the natural disagreement tendency. I know in this household, depending on, like last week, if I said the sky was blue, Danga would have said it was yellow. This week, if I say it's blue, he'd agree that it's blue. So Tim mentioned about, that unknowing causing stress. When we're all stressed, it's hard to agree, particularly when there's family dynamics involved. So having some numbers, but it just giving people those numbers to have a look at and saying, well, come back to me and see what you reckon the approach should be. And this is a real live example. We were picking carpet last week, and I said to Danga, I gave him 3 sticky notes of 1, 2 and 3. I said, go and put those in, and I stayed out of the room. And we ended up agreeing on the same colour. But I know if I'd been standing there, he would, and I'd said I like that colour, he would have liked a different colour. So sometimes we've got to let people process the information without us trying to push our point of view forward. And that could be pretty important, I reckon, in this situation.
Kate, I've wanted to mention that we've posted the resources in the chat box, and also some numbers, the revenue table that can give some people some numbers to crunch their own and start some estimates too.
Yeah, and with that little revenue table, what I do with it is cut it out. Print it out and actually cut it up and make a little just a little ready reckoner that I carry around in the phone. And it's just one less calculating out. And the liver cleanse sheet, I can post that up. We might send that out. Would that be possible, BCG team? Yeah,
Absolutely.
we'll do that.
Yeah. And the yield estimates, the going out and measuring the heads too, Kate, we'll share that as well.
Yeah, yep. Because I've got I have got that liver cleanse sheet, a nice PDF version of that we've been using in the AgVic Farm Business Resilience workshops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kate, look, otherwise we've allowed a lot of time for discussion. So if anyone has any questions that they want to add, please do so now. But we have covered a lot of topics. We've got some really simple actions that people can take now. And I suppose it's about the advantage of being aware of what you've got, accepting that, and then what can be done practically moving towards harvest to have a strategy. Kate, you, in your experience, have people gotten better at doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. I think we have got a lot better at. We've had plenty of practice at it. Particularly in those millennial drought years, and I think now because the seasons are variable from one year to the next, we've got better at our brain sort of flicking from one position to the next. So we're certainly getting a lot better at it. People are getting better at knowing what they need to do to have their thinking machinery in the right spot to make good decisions and prioritise well. I think probably the next step is managing that dynamic so that we're making good collective business decisions. And I like using the framework that you mentioned there, Lou, of what do we need to be aware of? What do we need to acknowledge and accept? And then what do we need to agree on as a farm business team and the key decision makers? Because often that's where we get stuck in non-decision making syndrome, because no one can agree. And then the action bit comes last, not first. So, awareness, acceptance, agreement, and action.
And I suppose this webinar has been in response to the season this year, but really this would be good practice regardless of what the season's like. So a great September or October activity anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. And in favourable seasons, it's even more important because there's so much money out there that we need to make sure we collect that money and don't leave it for the chooks or the crows. So it's important in every season, and I think it is. We're getting with the sort of the harvest loss calculations and the machinery we can put underneath harvesters now to work out what's actually happening at harvest time too. We're getting a lot better awareness of how much we have been leaving behind in previous years, and all these little 1%ers are the things that add up to closing the yield gap and the revenue gap.
Yep, absolutely. Kate, do you want to summarise any key points that you've reflected on? Where unless anyone else has any questions, we can finish up.
Righto. Well, yeah, I guess we started just recognising that we're human, and I'll put that there particularly for the scientists and the agronomists that will be listening to this that might get frustrated with some of their clients. You know, everyone's human. It's a normal response to feel fear and fear of that unknown. And it's, if you're disappointed because of what's happened or frustrated, they're all normal human responses, and just be compassionate to yourselves and others. Accepting our reality. So right now it's like this, and then getting into some awareness activities and assessment activities. So getting in the paddock, looking at not only sort of individual paddocks to get a feel, but try to get an assessment of the whole of farm, whether that's on paper or both a mix of on paper and in the paddock. Looking at the business at that whole of farm level in terms of dollars, whole of paddock level in terms of dollars, and just 3 simple scenarios: best case, worst case, and most likely. And then do all that and think about some decisions you need to make and how to make it all work.
Doing some sums can help those decision makers.
Yeah, I'm a big one for sophisticated thinking and simple sums, to paraphrase the famous Bill Malcolm. They really can make a difference.
Okay, thanks very much for your time today, and I hope the participants have enjoyed the discussion. Again, I want to acknowledge the funding from the Future Drought Fund, and I'm also really keen to know if people listening go out, jump the fence, and go and take some assessments. So we're keen to hear from them. They can share it with us on BCG social media, or send us an email at info@bcg.org.au. Be great to hear from anyone. And again, we will share the resources, the extra resources that we discussed. And I hope harvest goes really well for all of you, come what may.
And Lou, just to that point about sharing experiences, I think if people do share experiences on social media about, crop assessments and what they're doing and how useful it is, that'll have way more impact than me talking about it. So I really encourage that.
Yeah. Yep. Again, thank you everyone. And all the best for the rest of the season.
Cheerio. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Done.